Chapter 7, Geetha and Mr. Pickles. Yip, 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 bark, 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 bark. I groaned into Mila's ear. Mr. Pickles, I presume? The door opened. The witness from the library, Mrs. Flint, smiled at Mila. Mr. Pickles jumped up and down by her feet, yapping loudly. Bark, bark, grrr, bark, 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 bark. Geetha stepped behind me. Don't worry about Mr. Pickles, Mrs. Flint said cheerfully. He's just excited. The little furball jumped up and down. Mrs. Flint bent down until she was nose to nose with Mr. Pickles. No, Mr. Pickles, no, she screamed. We don't mind, I lied. Mr. Pickles is just, lively? I bent down to pet Mr. Pickles. He snapped at my hand like a hungry wolf. Down, Mr. Pickles, down, screamed Mrs. Flint. I'm so sorry, she fretted, shoving Mr. Pickles away with her foot. I'll put Mr. Pickles in the basement. I thought that was a terrific idea. Mrs. Flint led us to a screened back porch. It was filled with plants and strange flowers. Welcome to my jungle, Mrs. Flint said, offering us a lemonade and cookies. This is Geetha Nair, I explained, gesturing to Geetha. She's an artist. Geetha smiled politely at her shoes. She rested a large artist's pad on her lap. In her fist, she clutched a bundle of colored pencils. Mila explained the plan. We wanted Mrs. Flint to describe the skateboarders. While she talked, Geetha would try to draw a picture of them. Oh, how thrilling, Mrs. Flint said, snapping into a cookie. Just like on television. I coughed. This is for real, I reminded her. We already knew the identity of the first skateboarder. That was David Chang. Mrs. Flint described him perfectly. I winked at Mila. Mrs. Flint was a good witness. What about the others? I prodded. Mrs. Flint gobbled down another cookie. A few crumbs fell onto her lap. She closed her eyes and spoke. Bright red hair, very curly. Freckles. A little pug nose, like a piglet. Geetha asked a few questions. She wanted to know the shape of his head, his eyes, his mouth. I looked at her sketch pad. Wow, that's him, I said, remembering the boy at the library. Great, Mila said. Now we can show the picture around. Somebody is bound to know his name. What about the third skateboarder, I asked. Mrs. Flint frowned. He wore a sweatshirt with a hood. I didn't get a good look at him. The sweatshirt was dark green, she told us, and the boy was taller than the other two. But that was all she knew. We gobbled down the last of the cookies and left. Once outside, I turned to Mila. We've got to find the third skateboarder. Mila pointed at Geetha's picture of the red-haired boy. Let's find him first. I think he'll lead us to the boy with the green sweatshirt. Great work, I thanked Geetha. You've been a big help. Geetha stared at the ground. Slowly, ever so slightly, the corners of her mouth turned up into a smile.